Welcome to today's Lunch and Learn. I am super excited to have Lindsay Coulter join me. So I'll let you say hi to everyone.
Hi, Christine. Thanks so much for having me today. I'm super excited to be here too. This is fun.
So Lindsay is a wedding photographer, but then you had COVID and the pandemic and being in Canada. You're in Canada, right? Are you in?
Yeah,
Are
I'm
you
in
in?
Ontario, so
Okay.
where Toronto is, I'm close to Toronto.
I know. I'm always like, wait, are you in Kitchener, Waterloo? One of
Yeah,
those.
Kitchener. So yeah,
Okay.
most people don't know where Kitchener is, but yes, I'm about an hour away from Toronto. So yeah, we're in like a tech capital of Canada is where I live.
I didn't realize that was the tech capital of Canada.
It is.
I mean, it
It
makes
is.
sense.
It
Makes
is.
sense.
Yeah.
Especially makes sense knowing who I know that lives there too.
Right. Yeah. They're probably all involved in tech type things. It's called the Silicon Valley of the North. So we have a ton of startups. It's like literally a Silicon Valley of the North.
um, so, how long ago did you start photographing weddings? How long have you been in the industry?
Yeah. So also hi to everybody that's here. Taylor is my husband. He's joining from a plane. He's flying home from Iceland right now. I
Hi, Taylor.
have been photographing weddings for close to 10 years. Speaking of my husband, I started photographing weddings alongside Taylor when we first met. He was shooting weddings full time, like 50, 60 weddings a year. And basically said, if you want to date me, you're going to have to get used to coming to weddings on the weekend. I wasn't a photographer at the time. I was in university for environmental management, geography, totally unrelated. But
Not related.
yeah, I was very interested in traveling. I was interested in entrepreneurism. So when Taylor introduced me to photography, I was like, oh yeah, like I could be good at this. I think I am a creative. I like the idea of running my own business and having my time for myself. And the lifestyle of it was obviously very attractive, the flexibility and everything involved in it. So I've been a wedding photographer for about 10 years. As I think a lot of wedding photographers, I also did family and commercial, and kind of like if someone asked, I would take photos
Right.
of their kids. But it wasn't a huge focus of mine until the last couple of years when the event scene in Ontario drastically changed for the
And
worse.
the guidelines, the rules, like you guys were under really strict
Yeah,
rules for the
yeah,
past 2 years.
the rules were really crazy, and I don't know if a lot of people really know. Like, I feel like probably Americans know how crazy things were up here in Canada. I mean, they were crazy all over. It's not like the pandemic was isolated to Canada, but
Right.
the political scene was very messy up here. So in Ontario, specifically where we are, our businesses were closed for about 18 months of the last 2 years. So like literally not allowed to work, not allowed to shoot weddings, not allowed to go to events. So I had to make some choices to keep my business moving forward, and decided, you know what, okay, I'll start doing more family sessions. And then they said, okay, no more personal photo shoots. You can only do them for commercial purposes. So I was like, okay, branding sessions it is. So now I have these three like very significant branches of my business: the weddings, Lindsay Coulter Families, and then Lindsay Coulter Creative, which is the branding and commercial side of things.
Yeah. Yeah. So I like though that you were able, even with, I live in Texas. Eventually they were like, best of luck to you, do whatever. Like
Yeah.
we had the opposite experience
Yeah.
fairly, I mean, not immediately, but fairly early on. But I like that that you were able to take everything that you had already been doing and make these shifts so that you could still keep working and
Yeah.
find the
I mean,
way.
you know what? I think that's like a really good point. The interesting thing with being a wedding photographer, I'm sure everybody, if you're a wedding photographer, has had this fear of, prior to the pandemic even, what happens when the inquiries stop coming in, the bookings stop coming in? What happens if I become irrelevant and nobody wants to hire me again? And every time I've had one of those worries, I like to remind myself, I have built this like very unique skill set of the ability to market myself, to connect with an audience, to build a website in 6 hours should I need to use social media and my audience, and I will always be able to land on my feet. Like that's kind of what I realized was I'll always be able to take the stuff that I currently know and turn it into something else, even if weddings aren't it or whatever. And obviously not to say that when things were falling apart up here and we were hitting lockdown after lockdown after lockdown, that it felt really exhausting and really relentless. But we're certainly coming out on the other side of things. Restrictions are definitely a lot more lifted up here, but it's really interesting. Taylor and I were just in Italy for the Way Up North conference, and hearing the photographers that are from Europe talking about last year's wedding season blew my mind, because Rebecca Carpenter, in her talk, she said, everybody knows last year was the year of the rebook. So we were shooting everybody's weddings that had rebooked from 2020. And I was thinking,
you weren't.
Oh, you were? Like I went from shooting 55 weddings in 2020 to 13, which I think was like pretty good considering that was like in those windows where we were allowed to work. And I only did about 20 last year because things were just we were not back in the full swing of things. But
do you so your weddings now are set, like your wedding brand is now separate from Taylor's
100%. And yeah, I guess I should clarify. I never worked for Taylor except for the very first few months. I learned how to be a photographer with Taylor, but I
trial by fire
shot with him. Yeah. And then within a few months, I did my own thing, decided I was going to finish school online because I was lucky enough to be shooting a lot of weddings and talking about, destination weddings with Taylor and doing all those kinds of things. So Taylor and I have always had two completely separate brands.
Yeah. Which is interesting because I feel like so many times we see couples that are working together as a couple. So I just wanted to make sure we let everyone know that there's actually a separation here.
I was talking about this with Sam Hurd and Taylor when we were in Italy about, how he has a partner who's also a photographer, Nessa, and I obviously am in a relationship with another photographer, and we were saying I think we may be a couple of the only like husband and wife or couples that are in relationships that have two separate businesses. I'm sure there are more out there, but the ones that we know of, because usually people join forces, but when you have two fully operational businesses, obviously it's going to make for a more profitable experience in the end.
Now, obviously part of why we're talking today is so that we can talk about AfterShoot as well. And so now you have two separate businesses, but you also want to have a life together. So like what role does AfterShoot and any other technology you want to talk about, what role does that play in this for you?
Yeah, absolutely. So, interestingly enough, being a photographer, although we use technology constantly on a daily basis, I am not what I would call like an early adopter per se. So when the idea of AI started coming out, I was like, that's nice for someone, someone way cooler than me who is far more cutting edge and is, taking bigger risks. I was like, I'm not 100% sure that it's for me. Right. Thankfully, Taylor pushed me and was like, you got to give this a try, because for me, the biggest barrier to getting started on my editing was always the cull, was always this daunting task of like, oh my gosh, I just shot in a wedding, 3,000 images potentially between myself and my second photographer. And I enjoy the edit. I have no problem sitting down and editing. I really enjoy that. It's like an artistic process. The cull feels a lot less artistic to me. Obviously, there is an art to it, but it's not the part that I really enjoyed. So this for me was the thing that I was like, oh, okay, there is a software out there that can just remove that barrier for me. So immediately, after a shoot, whether it be a family session or a wedding, I'll come back to the studio and back everything up and then immediately start culling through AfterShoot. And that process has been a complete game changer I feel like everybody says that when they're talking about AfterShoot, like that's a game changer. Like, does it sound too cliche at this point? But it's true. Right. It's the process that has allowed me to skip over the wait. I don't know if this sounds familiar to any other photographers here, where they back things up and then they're like, I'm just going to wait until about 3 days before that's due to get moving on it.
Only 3 days?
Yeah, maybe is that generous? I'm not sure. So I found that it was the thing that got me moving on things a little bit faster. It really helped me to just get things going a lot quicker. The thing that I love about specifically the things that AfterShoot will pull out. So closed eyes, right? Like if you're talking about a wedding, I know, Christine, you do boudoir, right? Or have you?
Right now I'm just focused on AfterShoot. But yeah, okay, I did boudoir for many years.
Boudoir in the past, is that a thing? I mean,
for many years.
So maybe closed eyes are a thing that you would enjoy more in your business.
Exactly.
Yeah. And as a wedding photographer, a lot of the closed eyes that I see are unintentional grabs, right? Especially in group photo settings. So one of the worst parts of a day for me to cull is family photos and group photos, because you're just like, your face is an inch from your monitor. Like, wait, is it that one or that one? That one or that one, right? And we have to take the guesswork out of which one it is. And that's what I find AfterShoot does. It takes all of the guesswork out of which one is the best one. The machine computer just decides that for you, right? So
the magical unicorns.
The magical unicorns. Of course. Yeah. I know another person saying, calling family photos, no thanks. Like, yeah, it's just, again, it comes down to what do you find joy in and what don't you find joy in? Maybe somebody just absolutely loves culling, and in which case they can, still enjoy the process, just have AfterShoot do the bulk of the work and then you go through it. But I would say for the most part, we enjoy shooting. Maybe you enjoy editing, but I've never really heard anybody say, you know what, I just love to sit down and just cull for hours.
I've actually asked that question at various, like I was talking on a stage in front of a conference, and I said, who here loves to cull photos? And one person raised their hand. Everybody else was like, no.
Were they lying?
But no. I actually talked to her afterwards, and she's like, I really enjoy it. And it's like really, but it was like for her, it was a methodical rhythm to it. And that for me, it's nothing but stress and anxiety and knowing that I'm going to have to make 3,000 decisions. Like they're micro decisions.
It is but a decision over and over and over again. And as a photographer, I already spend so much time making decisions that like really truly matter. Like on a wedding day, I probably make thousands of decisions, Yeah. Am I going to go to the girls or the guys first? Am I going to do this detail shot right now, or should I leave that for later because I have this going on? Should I go and do this right now? Should I send my second photographer? Like there's so many decisions that obviously really, really matter. So once I've already taken, I've already made those photos happen. I have already shot them. I don't want to be making that many more decisions. I would just like somebody else to make them, and the unicorn can. So it makes it a lot easier for me to just remove some of that out of the equation. And then also just make it so that I have a little bit more headspace by the time I sit down. One of the things that I find, or sit down to edit, one of the things I find is a really big barrier for editing for me is that I have already looked at these photos so many times if I've culled them myself, right? So in my mind, I've already envisioned the photos before I've taken the photo, right? Then
Right.
I take the actual image. Then I'm looking at them as I'm backing them up. Then I have to watch them again as I'm culling them. By the time the edit comes, I feel like I've already done it. You know what I mean? Like I feel like I've already
Well, and
edited the photo and I haven't, and it's shocking.
and I think that's like after shoot. I had gotten into what I really sort of consider a bad habit, and it led to over delivering and everything else. But I was doing everything in the editing software because I didn't want to look at it 5 times.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I
And
was
I've
like,
heard that too, where people are
I'd pick
actually
A
coloring.
versus B and then make the changes right away and move
Yeah.
on,
Yeah.
which was just exhausting. I think that's why it made me dread it even more. And we always talk a lot about, I think there's this misperception that people think, well, I'm not a wedding photographer, so AfterShoot isn't for me. But you
Right.
actually started using this in this
When I
time
wasn't
period when
doing
you
weddings. Yeah.
couldn't do weddings literally
Yep.
or travel anywhere to go do a wedding. You guys were so locked down because I know Taylor had the issue not coming to WPPI in 2021 because of
Yeah.
lockdowns and everything. So
Yeah, I know. I was like, what do you mean people are in Las Vegas? We're not allowed to leave
so
our homes.
yeah. So how did this work for you with either those family sessions or eventually the commercial branding sessions once you had to transition to what they still allowed you to do?
Yeah, so I set up my after shoot settings differently for weddings and for portraits, because I would say that I deliver more images for weddings than I do for portraits, obviously just in quantity, but also just, you know, I don't cull out quite as much when it comes to weddings, whereas
Right.
portraits, I'm a little bit more selective. So I like that I can switch up the percentages based on what I will and will not allow. Like I will not allow a somewhat blurry image during a portrait session for a family, because it probably just doesn't make sense for my brand. But when it comes to weddings, unfortunately, there's just going to be moments that are maybe a little bit blurry that aren't perfectly sharp images because we're dealing with really quick real life moments instead of maybe a bit more staged images and stage moments happening with families and portraits. So I do tweak them as far as like the actual settings go. But yeah, I started using AfterShoot while I was doing family sessions more so than anything else. And I mean, at the end of the day, if you enjoy spending time outside and enjoying your life and enjoying your family time, it doesn't matter if you're a family photographer or a wedding photographer, it's still going to save you time and energy. So whatever the thing is that is taking time from you, try to find a way to give yourself the time back. I don't know if you feel the same way, because maybe you guys went back to like normal life a little bit faster than we did here, but having the time and the space at home and a lot more free time reminded me how much I enjoy having free time because I had
Right.
just been in such a like head down and hustle mode for so many years that I forgot what it was like to have time with my family. Like it was just, if my family had a family get together, I immediately just said no because I assumed I wouldn't have time for it. I'm like, a weekend, like, do you know
Oh,
what I
never.
do?
Yeah.
And that's just so crazy my immediate response was no. And now I've realized, okay, well, my values have shifted. And I feel like probably a lot of people over the last couple of years, your values shifted,
Sure.
right? What's important to you?
Absolutely.
Like, let's bring it back to what really matters. And we talked about this really briefly before we got started, Christine, but, a lot of people do things backwards. It's like, well, I'm working really hard so that I can have this life that I can enjoy later. But I would like to enjoy my life currently also. So
Right.
although, we are talking about AI and software, it comes into a much bigger picture thing than just some software that I use. It comes down to how many hours do I get for myself? rather than for my clients don't know. You know what I mean? Like if it was a thing that was really removing the quality of the level of service I was giving my clients, then of course we would all question it and be like, no, 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 that's not for me. But it doesn't do that. If anything, it means my clients are getting their photos back faster, and they're also getting photos that are probably called better than I would call them, truthfully, right? Because it's actually catching closed eyes and it's actually going to catch blurred images. Whereas after my eyes have been staring at a computer screen for 12 hours, they're not going to catch those same things. So there is this balance of quality and still maintaining that level of service that we want to give our clients, but also being like, I kind of also really want to enjoy my life. So what's that balance?
Well, and you mentioned that you guys were just in Rome, that you also have a lot of travel going on too. So
Yeah.
how does AfterShoot play into that for you?
Yeah. I mean, anything that allows me to like set it and forget it. Is that, I feel like, what was that? That was the thing in the 90s, right? Wasn't it?
Oh, it was for sure, but it's totally like
Commercial?
Instant Pot, set it and forget it
It was
type
one of those things,
thing.
right? But
Yeah.
anything that allows me to run a process and walk away from it and come back and have it be mostly done,
Mhm.
that's the thing that I'm going to love, right? So because we do now again travel fairly often for our work, that means a lot of time that I cannot be working necessarily. I try to work on planes and stuff, but it's a lot of lost hours when you're physically in front of people and you're not in the office or in the studio editing.
Right.
I think for people that want to grow their business, they want to get to the point that they can travel and they can do all of those things. Something has to give. There's no way that you can do all of it all at the same time. It's impossible. Like I have tried it. And it's not just a matter of like, will you burn out? It's literally not possible. So when I look at even just the difference in Taylor's business versus my business, he does a lot more YouTube and I do a lot more families. If I want to do more YouTube, I have to do less family shoots, right? So instead of me saying, well, I want to do less family shoots if I want to do more YouTube, why don't I do less time in front of my computer, right? So sometimes it comes down to like getting better at email automation, right? So I use email templates to automate my responses to my clients, right? Like instead of me typing out every single word to every single email, especially when they're emails that they're pretty standard, an inquiry. Hey, we're interested in your wedding services. What's your availability look like and what's your pricing look like? These are standards, anywhere in your business that you find yourself doing the same thing over and over again. I think it's important that we all look at those things and say, how can I optimize this? How can I make this better? How can I make this more enjoyable? How can I make this faster? Like I can't remove culling from my business. Unfortunately, it's a thing that I haven't gotten to the point yet that I'm shooting an image and delivering it. I'm not that good. It just hasn't happened for me yet. There are going to be images.
And if you're not calling them, someone has to call them. Like it
100%.
has to happen
And
either
I
by a
actually used
human.
to pay people to do it. So I used to hire my assistants to cull because it was the barrier for me to edit. I was fine with doing the editing or outsourcing my editing when I was really slammed. But the cull was always the biggest barrier. So I was spending, $25 an hour to have a person do like, what an incredible waste of our team's resources when they could be doing my marketing. They could be doing anything, literally anything else other than this thing that now happens really, really quickly.
And I think for me, part of the first time because I used AfterShoot before I joined the company as like I'd done an event, photographed an event and needed it culled. And I think for me, that was probably part of why I immediately was like, it was a huge sigh of relief. And I immediately like just embraced what AfterShoot chose because I had outsourced I had somebody that came and did my editing for me that was local to me. And I was like, well, AfterShoot probably did that better than her. Sometimes she would get so fast that she would move onto the next picture as she was selecting the first one, and then the selection would end up on the
It would be
wrong
the second.
photo and like things like that. So I was always having to spend that 20 to 30 minute check after she worked
Or
anyway.
I would find that they would be too emotionally involved in it. Like if it's an assistant that actually shot the wedding with me or shot the session with me, they would get too emotionally involved that they would be like, well, I remember the mom saying she doesn't like this. So I'm going to work really hard to call that out. Or I'm going to make sure that I include a lot of these because I heard the mother of the bride say this is really important. And while I agree, those are important things to listen to.
Right.
Why shouldn't we just let AI do its thing? And then I have more time on my hands to go back and make sure, oh, we did include some of those things, right? So I think that was my biggest fear getting started with AfterShoot was like, well, how is it going to know this really specific thing? Well, it doesn't, but it knows generally what a wedding should look like. It knows generally what this portrait session should look like. And then you have all this extra time to go back and make tweaks. It's the same thing as when I started outsourcing my editing. They don't get it 100% of the time. That's not the goal, I don't think. And I think that's what people sometimes miss when it comes down to like letting something go out of your hands. Is that they think that, well, if I'm paying for this and I'm giving it up, that it should be perfect. And that's, I think that we have to get out of that mindset. It should get you your time back so that you have the time to perfect it yourself, so that you can go back and add in the images that are perfect. You're still saving hours upon hours. There's no chance, right? Like that it's ever going to take you more time. But when it came down to having my editing outsourced, it meant that I had more time to do more fine-tune retouching, which I absolutely didn't have time for on weddings. And be like, oh my gosh, the idea of doing fine-tune retouching on a wedding gallery after I've already said, I
looked at it. By that point in time, you've looked at 20 times by then.
The idea of me removing under eye circles and flyaways was just like a terrible thought. I was like, well, we'll see if they ask for anything specific or anything that goes in a printed album or whatever I will do. So I think just finding the balance where whether it's a software or a template or something that gets it there a bit more for you than you could and saves you a little bit more time, maybe you could actually be doing better work. Maybe it's not making your work worse. Maybe it's making it better.
Right. And we talked about travel and we talked about, AfterShoot and the cool tech, but I still love the randomness of this experience. That I've heard that AfterShoot gives you time to drive places.
Oh man, yeah. What a funny, honestly, might be one of the weirdest things that's happened to me recently.
So let's clue them into what we're talking about.
Yeah,
for those that don't know.
What is this? And first of all, where did Lindsay come from? How did you get involved? So, back in November, I was doing all of my Christmas holiday sessions for families, and I get a phone call from a friend of mine who is like a music video and like a director and producer basically. And he's like, Lindsay, I just got this really big job. It's with Ford Canada. And I know that you drive an electric vehicle and they're hoping to find someone with a career that's interesting and cool and can talk about how technology has pushed their businesses forward. And I was like, me? I don't know that I'm super techie. And he was like, well, you drive an electric vehicle. I know that you have talked about how you use AI software. I had talked about the Monogram palette. I don't know if you're familiar with that, Christine. There's a few of them out there, but it's it looks like a DJ deck for editing.
Oh, yeah. Like the deck type.
Yeah. So there's a couple of them out there. One of them is called Monogram, and they're actually from our city. They're from Kitchener. So I use that. And he was like, I think that you're pretty techie. And I was like, oh, you know what? I am pretty techie. Thank you very much. So went through the whole casting process and ended up getting cast in this Ford Canada commercial, where I basically had a 5-minute, there's a couple of different segments, but a 5-minute episode where they wanted to highlight the kinds of tech that I use and how I get more time back for myself. It was like a very interesting collab.
It was an
That
interesting spin on it
it
because
was a really weird
ultimately,
spin. Yeah, I think that they were just trying to not make it so car focused, I guess, is my assumption. They didn't want to just be like, we have a car. Would you like to
well,
drive?
and I'm very convinced from years of traveling and telling people that I'm a photographer, I'm very convinced that like astronaut, professional photographer, like
They're the two
everybody wants,
businesses.
they're like
Yeah,
the two careers that everybody's like, oh my God, you're a professional photographer. That must be the coolest thing.
that must be
Like it's
so
the
cool.
only thing cooler is probably being an
They think you're
astronaut.
only shooting for Vogue covers. That's all you could possibly be doing. You're shooting in Milan. Like, you know what I mean? These are the only things that you could possibly be shooting. Um, but one of the things that we kind of pulled out when I was going through the casting process is how much time I spend driving,
Mm,
because I'm driving from location to location. Ontario is a really, really big province, and we have like a lot of really beautiful places. Muskoka is like a really popular spot for people to go cottaging, and that's a popular photography location, but it also happens to be 4 hours from where I live. So one of the things that we were talking about in order to pull out inefficiencies in my business is driving is a huge inefficiency. And short of me taking a train places, which isn't a possibility in most cases,
right.
I was like, well, I can't take the driving out. So I had to find other things that I could do to make my business more efficient, which is where AfterShoot came in. We were talking about how do you make your entire business more efficient. And although efficiency is not like the sexiest conversation topic, it's the thing that
I don't
allows
know. I
me,
love it. I
but
think it's
it's
the
the thing that
sexiest
allows
topic in
me
the
to like
world.
get on planes more often and go to the beach. And I see some photographers and they're just like plunked in front of their computer with a coffee and like they're romanticizing that idea. And I'm like, by all means, there's nothing wrong with loving that side of your work. But
Right.
there's also something to be said for if your partner or your friend says, hey, do you want to do something this Friday? If you don't have a shoot, being like, yeah, I do. I do want to do that thing. And I can actually do that because I don't have this daunting to-do list over here.
I also love the fact, having done prior to my boudoir photography career, I did weddings for several years. And I had 1 year where I did, I'm going to underestimate. I know it was more than five, but I did at least five destination weddings and they were pretty close together. And
Yeah.
like you said, it's this matter of like, how am I going to get called while I'm on the plane and everything else? And I love that with AfterShoot, I don't have to rely on horrible hotel Wi-Fi because
That is
it
such a
is the
good point.
worst.
It is such a
Like,
good point. Yeah.
yeah,
Being able to run it while, it's just running off of your actual machine is a huge benefit. Actually on our way home from Italy, I was trying to decide if I was going to finish editing a wedding or if I was going to run after shoot and nap. And I ran after shoot and napped. And it was amazing because then I was like, I gotta edit this wedding when I'm not dealing with the overhead lighting that's like purple and red going on in these in
right. It's so bad.
but it was amazing because I was like, I am just going to leave my laptop open, plugged in, and let it run. So it ended up culling the photos that I had taken while we were in Italy. And now they're just ready to be edited, right? When I get home, it's still one task that was done. I was sleeping, which is awesome, right? Like, I mean, it's the exact same thing as when I finish a wedding. I'll stay awake to back the thing up because obviously that's important. But the cull, I'm going to bed. I'm going to sleep. And then the next morning I wake up, it's already pulled out selections for me to do a preview gallery for my clients. Here's like 40 great photos from yesterday. And the cull is pretty much done. So if I'm sending it off to my editor or I'm editing myself, it's pretty much there, and it happened while I was sleeping, right? Which is like everybody's goal who doesn't want something to work for you while you're sleeping. And I haven't figured out the make money while I sleep. I'm not, I haven't.
But I actually think you have because
I mean,
we can
ways.
always make more money. We can never make more time.
Yeah.
Which I actually want to dive into that topic, but really quick. we have a question.
Mm.
What is one of your favorite tweaks, hacks, tips? Is there any favorite thing that you have discovered about AfterShoot that you feel makes the experience better?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing that I would recommend is to just not overthink it. And I know that's like a very general statement. Um, but don't overthink it. Look at the selected images and try to be okay with where they are. Try to not be like, I'm going to now go into all the duplicate groupings and look at every single one. Do it for your first few for sure to make sure it's running
Right.
how you want it to, and start making some swaps if you need to, but try to not overthink it is my first one. My second one is the workflow. I think is really important. Figuring out what workflow makes sense for you. For me, I like to first go over eyes closed ones to make sure there weren't any important ones, and that's a really quick, easy scan. I find.
Yeah.
I'll generally skip to the bride and groom portraits because those are the only like probably intentionally closed eyes that I'm going to see in a wedding day, or in a portrait session. So if it's an engagement session or, a mom and daughter session or whatever, there might be some intentionally closed eyes, right? The little
Cuddling.
snuggle. So I like to go through closed eyes because it's generally a pretty small folder, a really easy, like I like to check things off. There's something really satisfying about being like, okay, the closed eyes are done, right? Then I go through rejected to make sure there weren't any really obviously important rejected images that I needed in there. And then I'll go through, so if it's for a wedding, I'll go through the important moments that I need to make sure were included, were actually selected. So a first kiss. So I'll go through and make sure, okay, now I've made sure none of the ones I wanted were excluded. Now I have to make sure the ones that I wanted were included. So these are just like top level, full overview. I'm not going through every single image in the gallery. And then I'll put it into like a grid view and I'll just start scrolling and make sure that everything in there looks good. Some people will do it differently. They'll go into the loop and look at every single one. If I'm editing it myself, I probably won't do that because I'm going to see them all when I'm pulling them into Lightroom.
Right.
If I'm outsourcing it, I might, because I'm not confident that they're going to reject something if it was in there by accident. But workflow wise, I find that makes sense. So look through closed eyes, look through the rejected, and then ensure that everything that you need to make sure, like there would be nothing worse than sending it off to an editor, being like, everything looks great, export, upload, and then
Go ahead and upload it for me, right?
Right? Then finding out, oh, I just didn't include a kiss photo because I happened to be a stop slow on my shutter speed, and now it's like a little bit blurry, and magical unicorn maybe thought it wasn't needed to be included. So important to make sure that you do the due diligence and pull things through. I also remove all of the stars from mine. I mean, I think using it is the most important thing. Use it a few times yourself and figure out what works and makes the most sense for you. But
and what weaves into your existing process that you do feel established.
And I remember when I first opened it, I was like, oh, but I already use like a star rating for mine. Like I already use one as things that I'm going to have to Photoshop, right? So if I use one now as, I don't even know what it is labeled as an AfterShoot, but
I'm pretty sure that's closed eyes.
Yeah, so if one is closed
I could be wrong.
eyes, like is that going to overwrite? But you can just very easily just turn that off. Use the color labeling system however you want, and then customize it. Start customizing it for you. I mean, you don't want to overdo it, but
by the way, I use red as this photo needs some attention.
Okay.
And one used to be my selected images. So I would just sit and hit one over and over.
Right.
And then I rank them in order. So if there was some picture where I was like, this picture must go out on social media as soon as I can get it out there, I give that a 5. But everyone has, and for me, that's personally one of my favorite things about AfterShoot, and something, a little behind the scenes, pulling the curtain aside. It is something that we talk about a lot because we know that everyone's going to have a little bit different workflow. So how can we make it simple for you to use, simple and easy to understand, but also adaptable, so you don't have to really change your entire workflow?
Yeah,
You know?
absolutely. I mean, that's, I think, probably a very hard balance for you guys to find. I can only imagine how much fun that is for the developers to figure out, like, okay, this is a thing that a few photographers have said they need. Does everybody need that? Are we overcomplicating it? And finding the balance of it's
Yep.
customizable, but not so complicated that a new photographer coming into this couldn't figure it out, you know? So, yeah, I think it's a really great question about, how to get the most out of it. I feel like when it comes down to tweaks and things like that, it's so personal. So just run it a few times, like just literally take some time with it, like carve some time out. And although I know setting up a new system, you're like, where am I going to find the time for that?
Right.
Well, you will get it back later. So take the time now, even if it's on a Sunday morning and you're like, that's a bummer. I had those few hours carved out. Well, those hours will come back to you, 1,000-fold in the future. So
And a lot of times I've had so many times at conferences and other events where people have said to me, they're like, oh, well, I don't have any photo sessions. I don't have any portrait sessions coming
right.
up, or I don't have any weddings coming up. My next wedding isn't for 3 weeks. And I'm like, but you have archives. So like
Run it on an old one.
yeah, run it on an old one, because then you can actually compare without having to do a lot of legwork. You
Yeah,
can truly compare what did AfterShoot select versus what you selected maybe a
that's a
year
really,
ago.
yeah,
But
that's such a solid point. Yeah,
you have practice material. You don't need to wait for the next
yeah.
thing. Matter of fact, I find for many people, like if you're just trying it when you're in crunch time, that's
Not
where I think some
necessarily a
people
great.
get, yeah, that's
Yeah.
where you get frustrated. And I
And
think,
stressful, right? And the
yeah,
machine
it is.
learning is really cool. Like the fact that it does learn. I remember I felt like I was my own hero telling Taylor about new technology because he's always the one telling me about it. But I was like, yeah, and it learns for you. Like it starts learning what you do. And he was like, no, it's not possible. It's not a web-based software. And I was like, well, listen, my friend, let me tell you, it does learn for you. And I felt like this guy is going to have the audacity to tell me it doesn't learn. I was like, well, maybe you need to do some reading. And I was like, no, it 100% starts learning for you because it has started selecting way fewer images for me than it initially started. I know that was like in the early few trials of it, I was like, oh, that it took way too many pictures. Like it
Yeah.
selected too many images. So
Because
I
you were in
started
like one of our very early
I
beta
was in the early group.
rounds,
Yeah,
right?
early group.
Yeah.
And it was selecting too many images. And then all of a sudden it just stopped doing that. And like, I think it's a combination of really good, really rapid updates. And we were talking about
Yeah.
that earlier about how crazy the updates can be, where it's like, in my mind, that was a problem. And now all of a sudden it doesn't do that anymore. And I'm like, oh, there was an update. That's nice. So it's a
Um,
combination of update and it learning, right? It's just learning your habits and how you're going about things, which I think is amazing. Who wouldn't want
And I
that?
think you brought up a good point, because I know some of the people watching right now, you may be watching from a variety of different channels, so you might not be in the AfterShoot community, but you had pointed that out when we were talking before we went live, was that like just being in the community helps you see, like learn things that have changed that you didn't realize have changed, because we
Yeah,
try very hard to make, we don't want our changes to be completely disruptive
for
for
sure.
you, the end user. We
Yeah,
realize you're in the middle of a working season, a workflow, and so we don't want to completely just throw like, oh, and now everything's different.
and would you believe 5 is now 1 and 1 is now 5?
Surprise.
Yeah,
But and for us, the community is also really helpful. That, for example, that's why now there are illustrations using photos of Justin of what different settings mean, because it's really hard to explain in words. We're photographers. We're generally visual people.
yeah,
Um,
absolutely. Yeah, anybody who's watching this that isn't in that community, I mean, I know Christine's pretty biased, but I am an unbiased patron of the group, and I have found it really, really helpful to be part of that Facebook community for sure. seeing how other photographers are using it and optimizing their own workflow has actually been really helpful. I set up my workflow very similarly to Sam Hurd's. I'm in his Patreon, and he was also a really early user of AfterShoot, and he was, sharing how he uses it. And I think seeing how other photographers implement it, the things that they're using, but also seeing other photographers in that group be like, hey, I'm not sure about this. Is this normal? And seeing a response being like, either yes or no, and maybe it's a problem I've already had. It's kind of like that kid in the class that doesn't want to put their hand up. That's me. So it's nice that other people are asking questions and getting answers that I didn't even necessarily know that I needed. So yeah, definitely recommend being a part of the group. It's really cool to see like the founders of your company responding and being like, hey, yeah, we'll work on that. That sounds like a really great idea. Why wouldn't we implement that? And what a cool thing to be an active user of a software, but also able to impact how it's going to evolve over the coming months and years.
I do think that's been a really huge key for us, which takes us right back to where we started to go. Like, if I was to ask you, what, we want to have a life. We want to make the most of our time and also have a successful business. Outside, obviously, use AfterShoot as your number one tip. But outside of your number one tip,
I don't have anything else. I think that's the beginning and the end of it.
But do you think there is anything? I mean, I feel like this is a thing. I mean, this is also all like a philosophical question. Like, we are in such a hustle culture of do, more, money. And, like you said, we've all experienced sort of a shift in the past 2 years. We've felt a change. We have felt this desire to be a bit different about that. But is there any other ways that that's shown up in your life, or any other, if somebody was listening and was just struggling with that right now, would you have a tip for them?
Yeah, 100%. I 100% I do. I don't know that there's anything that I care about in my business more than balance. I care about my business being profitable. I care about providing a really amazing service to my clients and them loving it and wanting to come back. These are all important things to me. But my life enjoyment has to be the reason why I do all of these things. And I mean, for the photographers that are only doing it for profit, well, your life enjoyment will not be there. My assumption is that,
I mean, it could be. I was at a point I was a single mom for many years. And so profit driven 100% for a while and brought me a lot of joy.
And honestly, you're speaking to a person who, like, I very much value a profitable business. Like, I don't prescribe to the starving artist concept at all. Like, that's not a thing that I aspire to. I became a photographer because I wanted a business. It wasn't like, oh, I'm an artist first. And that's throwing no shade to the people who are artists first at all. I think it's so important that we spend time doing the things that we love. For me, that means a lot of time outside in nature. I try to bring it into my house in my little jungle in here, as you can see.
I love your jungle.
Thank you.
I didn't tell you that earlier, but I love your jungle.
It's a little bit chaotic at the moment. There's maybe a bit too much going on in here, but I try to spend as much time in nature as possible. And as a photographer, I'm very blessed that I get to do that pretty much all the time. I spend a lot of time outdoors, but wearing dress clothes is not the way that I like to spend my time in nature. I would love to just be able to take things at my own pace, spend time walking my dog, hanging out with my parents, going to the cottage with my aunts and uncles and cousins, and just really spending time reminding myself, like, why did I want a business that had flexibility if all I was ever going to do was work 7 days a week, right? Like, it's kind of the joke in the hustle culture. I don't have a 9 to 5. I haven't when I open my eyes to when I close my eyes. Yeah. And to some level, I agree with that still, because that's how much I care about my business and I'm constantly thinking about it. But the nice thing for me about taking a step back and traveling or spending time in the woods, going to the cottage, that makes me better at my job. So taking that space allows me to be more creative. If you're always behind, if you're always feeling like I'm one step behind my business and it's running me instead of the other way around, cut some stuff out, find an efficiency somewhere if you can, increase your prices if you must, whatever the thing is that needs to give you more time back for yourself, do it, because it will in the end make you better, right? It's going to make you a better photographer. Thanks, Carrie. It is going to make you a better photographer. And it's just going to make you a better human in general. How can we connect with our clients if all we're thinking about is the massive to-do list back in the office, right? Like you go out for a photo shoot and you're like, this is going to be amazing. I'm going to really connect with my clients. And you get there and you're like, this is actually terrifying because all that I'm doing every time I take a photo is adding to that to-do list, right? I don't know if you've ever felt like that, but I've literally not looked forward to shoots because I know all it's doing is adding another line item onto my list of things to do. And
I fortunately haven't felt that way, but I get it. Cause you said that you take 3,000 photos at a wedding. And I was like, really? Just 3,000?
Oh, you do more?
I would come home from weddings, and this was before mirrorless. I would come home from weddings sometimes between my second and myself with 5,000, 6,000.
Well, okay, I will say ever since switching to the R6, that number's doubled, easily doubled. It's just like a disturbing thing. And I honestly have to constantly be thinking about why I'm doing that. I've actually gone back to starting to shoot film a lot more often because it reminds me. So I start my shoots out now by shooting film because it makes you so much more intentional about the images that you're taking instead of just being like, you know what I mean? It's the mirror is way too easy. It's way too easy. And it's way too easy to only have photos that are in focus. Like you have an auto eye detect on and all of a sudden every image that you have is in focus and well framed.
Everything's good.
So now it's perfect, So,
and I think we've touched on this, but I actually want to say it while you were speaking. It got me thinking. If somebody asked me right now after this conversation, someone called me up as soon as we got off this call and said to me what I asked you, like, what's the one tip? My tip would be you have to learn to let go. You might not actually be the best at every task. Someone else might be a better social media manager than you. Someone else might write better copy than you. I mean, I hate editing. So that was actually the first thing that went in my business was finding someone to do my editing for me. And for me, that was an easy thing to let go of. I know for some people, that's really a hard thing. They really want to hold on to that step as if no one else can do it. But 25 years ago, you were taking film and you were just taking it to a lab. You didn't have, we've added a complexity to photography over the past 25 years.
Where we feel the need to do everything, right? And it's a thing that I talk about with my friends. And I don't know, Christine, if you hear this more from female photographers. I know a lot of women photographers were very controlling. And I think it's a great thing. In some ways, we're very holistic about our businesses because they are our babies and because we had to work our butts off to create them. So I know a lot of women photographers that are very slow to give up the reins on some of those things because it is their, it's their lives, right? So I would encourage you though, if it truly is your life, give up some of it and see how much more you can enjoy it. Like you might not burn out as faster as you might actually find the joy in your business again, instead of finding that your company is being run for you, right? Like you don't have to be the social media manager. You don't have to, whatever those things are that are no longer bringing you joy, like, do the KonMari method and bless them and let them free.
Bless them, release, and let someone else take over.
Let them go.
And it's so funny because, we even use this in our wording. You said, if your business is your life, and it's a matter, and really like our business should be our business. and our life should be our life.
Right.
And but I do think I think it's not actually a specific men or women feel that way one more than the other. I think it's just because we're like, this is our art. Like we create from a place of love and we create from a place of our heart, and we become very protective around it.
For sure.
And
I think
don't want to let go.
And you know, I know a lot of very, very driven women. So it's not to say we don't want our businesses to grow, but we are, I shouldn't say we as women. I will say I have certainly in the past sacrificed my growth for perfectionism.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't say that in a positive way. Perfectionism to me is no longer a compliment. I don't like when people are like, she's perfect at that, like, you're so perfect at that. And I'm like, you have no idea what I had to sacrifice in order for something to be perfect. So for me, I would like to be just sub-perfect, just under whatever perfect is. Really, really exceptional, really, really good at something. The difference between exceptional and perfect from my client's perspective is probably imperceptible. They probably have absolutely no idea the difference. Only I will know the difference in that. But the difference will be felt in my family. The difference will be felt in my home. The difference will be felt in the fact that I get to take the long drive instead of the short drive because I just have to get from point A to point B, right? It's like, it's your life happiness. Like, how much is that worth to you, you know? And if the last couple of years have taught us anything, it's that like not every day is guaranteed. You have no idea how much time we have. And not to be, you know, so in depth about it, but we absolutely have to focus on the growth of our businesses, the longevity of our businesses, the sustainability, right? There has to be sustainability. And I've been at this for 10 years now. And there were times in my business where the amount that I was working and what I was doing was completely unsustainable. There was no way that I could possibly be doing 10 destination weddings a year, 50 weddings at home.
Impossible.
It's literally impossible. It's absolutely impossible to be culling, editing, and shooting all of those things. You have to do the math on how many hours there are in a day and how many days there are in a year. And the math isn't there. So what was I doing is either disappointing my family or disappointing my clients, disappointing myself because I wasn't sleeping. You know what I mean? Like, I can physically look at photos of myself from 6 years ago when I was on the verge of burnout and see the difference in my face. My skin looked bad. I was like gaining weight. You know what I mean? Like it's a much bigger conversation than culling, right? It's a much bigger conversation than, oh, so you got some hours back in your day. No, I got my life back when I started saying, okay, I'm going to give up some of the reins on the editing. I'm going to give up some of the reins on my social media. Will it be how I would do it? No, but maybe it'll be better.
and maybe it will be done. And I will also get to
instead of perfect, maybe it will be done, and maybe it'll still be exceptional and delivered on time and all of those things, right? There was one question. Am I allowed to answer a question? Am I going off? Am I going
Absolutely.
Off
no, okay. You can answer a question.
There was one question. I got to go back here. And I'm sorry if we have missed other people's questions. It's so hard.
There were a few questions that I've been letting Harshit and Justin have been answering questions in the chat. So there've been a few questions that are a bit more tech.
Okay, so and I'm happy to let the pros answer the tech questions. The one question that somebody had was, will it take a job away? And that's such an interesting question. Like,
I saw that too. Hang on, let me find it. There it is.
Yeah, they said, will it take a job away? And Keith mentioned like, well, is it like going to the grocery store and they've removed all of the personal side of things with like a cashier to now a self-checkout? For me personally, the person that I had culling still works for me. They just do better work and they do more fun and enjoyable work. Like essentially with culling, we already discussed this, but nobody's like, what I would love to do 9 to 5 every day is just cull. And cull somebody else's work, awful, right? So,
but there are actually people out there that love that. Not necessarily the culling part, but my editor did not want to be a professional photographer.
And
She had
yes,
no
and there are
desire to be a
totally people
photographer.
that it comes down to your values. There's a
Yeah.
lot of risk in being self-employed and being the one that runs the show and
Yeah.
taking the
And she
photos.
just didn't want to be a photographer, shocking as it
Maybe
is.
was
I'm
a
like,
really solid editor, right? So
doesn't everyone want to be a photographer? But apparently she didn't. But
I had no idea.
she taught herself Lightroom. She was actually working for me as like an office assistant. Like, hey, just help me get things out the door. And then she started studying the galleries that I was editing and taught herself Lightroom and taught herself how to cull and edit and just did she quickly knew more about how to edit than I did, and then took on a few other clients and
That's
everything else, and
awesome.
she loved it.
And
But
they're also less emotionally involved in it as well, so they
yeah,
can edit faster than we can, and also probably see trends that are popping up that maybe we're missing, because I'm like, well, this is how I've always done things. Doesn't
but
necessarily mean it's the right way to do things, but
as far as Keith's question, I would actually argue, I don't know, like there could be a huge conversation about AI technology that is massive. But in the case of AfterShoot, I'm pretty sure we're just taking the job away from the photographer who
yes,
already has too many jobs.
I would say for the most part, there's probably very few photographers that actually pay a human being to cull, right? Like
Yeah.
I have grown a
There
business
might
for
be
10
some.
years, right? Like
Yeah.
I've grown a business for 10 years. So there's a reason why I had to do that. And it also comes down to your model. Are you doing a ton? Are you doing quantity? Or are you doing like more in-person sales, more like trying to drive up your sales on a lesser amount of sessions? It kind of comes down to that as well. There's probably not a ton of people that have an individual outside of themselves doing the culling. But if they do, I guarantee they could think of other jobs they would like that person to be doing. And it was always like an assistant or someone like that I was wanting to do these things. But I had other tasks I would rather they did, but I was behind on the cull and I needed to get the edit done, but I couldn't do that until the cull was done. So, again, it's just removing the barrier for me. I enjoyed the edit. I enjoyed the process of finishing a shoot. It was just the culling was always that biggest barrier for me. So
the biggest headache.
Yeah.
The daunting looming task.
I know. And the best thing with this person over here, I think it's Melissa is saying is, what's the cost? And it's like, well, the other thing about hiring a human being is that you're paying them for every single individual session and every single wedding. And now you're just paying a one-time thing. So it's actually amazing if you shoot a ton because you're getting the same out of it just with a subscription instead of paying hundreds, if not thousands of dollars to have your stuff called. So financially, the money makes a lot more sense. Like how much, where you could put that money in your business in other ways just makes a lot more sense.
So the URL that I put up, aftershoot.com/friends, will actually get you a 30-day trial. So you can get started there. So you can go and check it out if you are not already a user. Because we want to give you time to experience it and see if it's the right fit for you, etc. But definitely go check it out.
Amazing. Yeah. I know this girl, Melissa, is saying that she burns out every year. And honestly, I'm so sorry about that. But
too. I feel like
this is a year that you don't burn out, my friend. This is it. Yeah. Make the change and your life will be so much better. I'm so happy for you. Like, I'm just actually jazzed. This is going to be a really big,
it's so excited. I feel like we need to do that thing where like the ticker comes up. And
it must be a really great feeling for you, Christine, knowing that you're bringing this to people, like that.
It is amazing.
We didn't know could even be a possibility, 2 years ago. I didn't even know it was a thing that I could have happen for me. Didn't even know it was an idea. And, to be able to have all of that time given back to you is just absolutely wild. And it must be very cool as like a marketing person to be like, by the way, I'm going to change your life.
Well, and that's actually the short version of my story. I had photographed this event. I had to get it out. They needed the images for social media. So it was a very quick turnaround. and I spent 6 hours procrastinating, doing anything else I could. I did, in fact, clean out a dresser drawer. I spent just anything I could do to avoid doing it.
My house is so clean because of procrastinating.
Yes. So I went into a Facebook group where Sam Hurd's a member, and my actual post was, didn't Sam Hurd talk about something where I could just put my photos in and like push a magic button and it would call them for me?
Yeah.
And I couldn't think of the name and I couldn't find it. And in my searching, I found a different software, but I was a Windows user. So I needed AfterShoot. Like and the very first comment 5 minutes later was a friend of mine said, have you tried AfterShoot yet? And I was like, no.
What is that?
What? Yeah. Does this exist? I'm ready. So, yeah, that's actually how I found it. By the time it was done doing the first call, I had written a Facebook post about how it had blown my mind. I had called 3 friends and told them to go get it. So yes, it does in fact feel amazing. Rosalind's like, I just got home from a 7-hour shoot of nursery children, and AfterShoot's culling while I'm eating dinner and listening to this webinar.
Blessed.
Winning.
Blessed. Like, honestly, how fun there's very few things as photographers that we can automate. There really are. Like, there are very few things that you can set and forget. You know what I mean? There's very few things that you can walk away from your computer, like exporting. No better feeling than hitting export and being like, oh, I'm working, something's happening, but it's just not me. You know what I mean? Like, that's a great feeling. This is right up there, right? This is right up there with that. The work is happening. It's just not you doing it, right? So you can go and eat your dinner and listen to your 2 new friends.
So thank you again for joining me today, Lindsay. I know you have a busy schedule, having just gotten back from overseas and everything else. So we will let you get back to your day. But thank you so much for taking time out.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you everybody for being engaged. It's so fun to chat and actually hear from you and hear your questions. Feel free to find me on the internet. I'm at Coulter Photo. You can find me on Instagram, and all my links to Facebook groups and everything are there as well. So hope to connect with you guys more.
We'll make sure that all your links are also in the in all the pages, so everybody can find you that way. So cool. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us. It has been great. Bye.